Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone who poisons your world and wondered why you still allow them to occupy space in your mind? The question is not merely rhetorical, it is a challenge to the very architecture of your self-discipline. To understand how to navigate the labyrinth of toxic personalities, one must first strip away the comforting illusions of friendship, loyalty, and civility. These illusions are weapons they wield against you, subtle yet devastating, eroding your peace with the precision of a master tactician. In the arena of human interaction, toxicity is a form of warfare. It is psychological artillery, cloaked in smiles, rationalizations, and whispered manipulations. And to survive it, you must learn to wield the cold, unflinching strategies that history's greatest minds, those unburdened by sentiment, have employed. Picture this: the office colleague whose compliments are barbed, who nurtures dependency only to exploit it, or the family member whose criticisms feel like cruel verdicts, shaping your choices long before you recognize their shadow. These are not accidents, they are patterns. They are the machinations of individuals who understand, whether consciously or instinctively, that control begins with the mind, not with force. Machiavelli wrote of princes and rulers, but the principle transcends crowns and thrones. Every interaction with a toxic person is a microcosm of power struggle. You are either the predator or the prey, and ignorance will condemn you to the latter. The first step is perception, the ability to see the undercurrents beneath the surface. Toxic people cloak their intentions in familiarity, in warmth, in the guise of connection. But beneath the facade lies calculation. They measure, they provoke, they exploit. Your task is to recognize these patterns without the bias of emotion. This requires detachment, a sharp, almost surgical awareness of human behavior. Empathy, often lauded as a virtue, becomes a liability when wielded without discernment. Machiavelli teaches that understanding human weakness is not cruelty, it is mastery. You cannot dismantle the machinery of manipulation while clinging to the hope that they will act as their best selves. They will not. They are experts at bending others to their will, and only by observing the architecture of their strategy can you construct your own defenses. Once you recognize their tactics, the next layer emerges: psychological positioning. This is not about confrontation in the traditional sense. It is about command. In a battle of wits, the person who perceives the full chessboard, who anticipates the moves before they materialize, holds dominion. Toxic individuals thrive on reaction. They are predators of the reflexive mind. Anger, guilt, shame, and fear are their tools. By learning to remain unshaken, unprovoked, you strip them of power. This is not passive submission. It is a strategic withdrawal, a repositioning of your forces where they cannot be assaulted. Imagine a battlefield where your adversary's weapons disintegrate upon contact with your armor. This is the power of disciplined emotional detachment. But detachment alone is insufficient. Machiavelli understood that force, subtle or overt, must be applied with precision. Here, the modern mind must adopt a philosophy of strategic interaction. You cannot eliminate toxicity entirely. Humans are flawed, environments are hostile, but you can control the terms of engagement. You dictate the boundaries, the tempo, the arena itself. The toxic person must understand, implicitly or explicitly, that their manipulations will no longer yield dividends. This is the essence of Machiavellian negotiation. Authority asserted not through brute aggression, but through the quiet, unyielding assertion of control. Your calm becomes a weapon, your silence a deterrent. Every interaction is an exercise in power dynamics, a contest of wills, and those who fail to perceive this are inevitably ensnared. Consider the layers of deception that toxic people employ, the flattery that masks insult, the feigned vulnerability that masks manipulation, the selective truth that disguises betrayal. To counter this, one must cultivate a mind that passes reality from performance. The human psyche is susceptible to narrative. It craves coherence, meaning, connection. Toxic individuals exploit this, weaving stories in which you play a predetermined role, often a role that benefits them at your expense. Machiavelli recognized this long ago. The most formidable adversaries are not those who strike openly, but those who choreograph events invisibly. Thus, your survival requires the same subtlety. Observe, listen, calculate, respond not with emotion but with strategy. Yet, Even the most disciplined mind must confront another truth. Isolation is a necessary tool. Toxicity thrives in the crowded spaces of influence, where opinions clash, loyalties fragment, and alliances shift. To distance oneself is not cowardice, it is preservation. The lion does not fight every hyena that encroaches on its territory. It chooses its battles and conserves its strength for decisive action. In human relationships, this principle is identical. By carefully curating proximity, by limiting exposure, you retain clarity, energy, and tactical advantage. Machiavelli would argue that the prudent leader does not merely react, they anticipate. You must learn to anticipate not only the actions of others, but the emotional residue they leave behind. Power, then, in the context of toxicity, is the ultimate form of liberation. It is the capacity to engage selectively, to respond with intentionality, to deny the toxic individual the satisfaction of influence. It is not about defeating them in a single confrontation. It is about establishing a condition in which they cannot penetrate your mind. This is the dark art of psychological sovereignty, a principle that Machiavelli codified for rulers and princes, but which applies with equal force to the private theater of everyday life. To walk among toxic people without losing oneself is to achieve mastery over the human condition itself. And yet, mastery is not static. The landscape shifts. New threats emerge, subtle manipulations evolve, alliances fracture. To endure, you must remain vigilant, adaptive, ruthless in your discernment. Toxicity will never disappear. It is a constant in the calculus of human interaction. The task is not to eradicate it entirely, but to render it impotent, a shadow that cannot touch your substance. This is the intellectual and emotional discipline that separates those who are manipulated from those who are untouchable. Machiavelli did not offer comfort, he offered power. And power, when exercised with clarity and precision, becomes freedom. As you reflect on these truths, consider the stakes. Every relationship carries the potential for subtle sabotage. Every interaction is a battlefield. Every smile may conceal intent. The question you must continually return to is simple, yet profound. Will you remain a pawn, moved by the unseen hands of those who exploit your trust and compassion? Or will you assume the cold, commanding role of the strategist, the observer, the master of your own domain? In the theater of human behavior, awareness is the first weapon, detachment the second, and strategic action the final decisive blow. This is only the beginning. To survive and thrive amid toxicity, one must progress from understanding to mastery, from perception to deliberate action. Machiavelli's dark psychology does not ask for kindness or forgiveness. It asks for clarity, precision, and unflinching realism. The mind that cultivates these qualities becomes impervious. And within the impervious mind lies the power to navigate the 7 pathways that will neutralize the toxic forces around you. These pathways are neither simple nor gentle. They demand rigor, courage, and the willingness to embrace the uncomfortable truths about human nature. They are the architecture of psychological dominance, the scaffolding upon which you will construct a sanctuary of control within an unpredictable, often hostile world. The toxic exist to manipulate, provoke, and consume. But you, armed with insight and strategy, can render their efforts meaningless. You can transform every encounter into a demonstration of discipline, every provocation into an exercise in self-command, every interaction into an assertion of sovereignty. The path ahead is treacherous, but it is illuminated by the cold, brilliant clarity of Machiavellian insight. And in the next stage, we begin the journey into the first of 7 cunning strategies, where theory meets execution, and where your mastery over toxic forces begins to crystallize into action. The first pathway to mastery over toxic people begins with the discipline of observation, a practice as old as the strategies of war, yet as delicate as a surgeon's hand. Toxic individuals are masters of concealment. Their intentions are layered, hidden beneath performance, rhetoric, and cultivated charm. To confront them without understanding the intricacies of their methods is to charge blindly into a storm, armed only with hope. Observation is your first weapon, and it must be wielded with precision. Every word they utter, every gesture, every pause, every subtle shift in expression contains intelligence. They speak not only with language, but with energy, with the currents of influence that ripple beneath surface interactions. To ignore these signals is to surrender your autonomy. Consider the office manipulator who positions themselves strategically, inserting themselves at the nexus of information flow, ensuring that they are always perceived as indispensable. They offer guidance that appears benevolent but subtly undermines others, planting seeds of dependency. The friend who shares confidences selectively, only to weaponize them later, exploits the natural human inclination toward trust. The partner whose mood swings create a constant environment of emotional instability ensures that you are perpetually off balance. These are not anomalies, they are patterns. The Machiavellian mind recognizes patterns because it seeks not reaction, but anticipation. Observation is not passive. It is the meticulous collection of intelligence, the mapping of terrain, the identification of weak points. Yet, the practice of observation is futile without the discipline of detachment. Toxic people are designed to provoke, to elicit emotional responses that cloud judgment. Anger, indignation, guilt, fear, these are their instruments, and your reactions are the notes of the symphony they compose. By cultivating detachment, you remove yourself from their narrative. You watch without participating, note without judgment, record without bias. Your emotional equilibrium becomes a mirror they cannot shatter. Detachment is a skill that requires conscious cultivation. It is not coldness, but clarity. It allows you to see the toxic individual in their true form, flawed, motivated by self-interest, predictable in their patterns, and ultimately, controllable. The second strategy is the careful management of boundaries. Toxic people seek to expand their influence, to occupy your mental and emotional territory without permission. They test limits with subtle provocations, small infringements designed to gauge your threshold. Here, Machiavellian wisdom becomes crucial. Power is asserted not only in confrontation, but in the quiet enforcement of limits. To maintain psychological sovereignty, you must establish, communicate, and enforce boundaries with unwavering consistency. This is not about moral righteousness. It is about strategic preservation. Every boundary you enforce is a declaration of authority, a signal that you are no longer a passive participant in their manipulations. Boundaries are most effective when combined with selective engagement. Toxic individuals thrive on attention, on the energy they can extract from others. By limiting exposure, you deny them the resources that fuel their behavior. This does not always require confrontation or explanation. In many cases, your absence is the most potent statement you can make. Distance, when applied strategically, disrupts the patterns they depend upon. It is a form of control that requires patience and foresight. Machiavelli understood the power of absence in governance, the strategic withdrawal that strengthens position and preserves authority. In human relationships, the principle is identical. By choosing when to engage and when to withhold engagement, you dictate the terms of influence. The third pathway involves the manipulation of perception, a concept often misunderstood. Machiavelli observed that people are shaped more by appearances than by reality. Toxic individuals exploit this fact, constructing narratives in which they appear virtuous, capable, or indispensable. To counteract this, you must learn the art of subtle influence. Your goal is not to mimic their deceit, but to engineer perception in a way that safeguards your position. This can mean presenting yourself with calm authority, demonstrating competence without arrogance, and allowing others to witness your resilience. Perception becomes both shield and sword. By controlling how you are perceived, you preempt their attempts to destabilize you. The fourth strategy is the selective use of confrontation. While detachment and observation are primary, there are moments when direct engagement is necessary. Here, the Machiavellian principle of timing is paramount. Confrontation must be precise, calculated, and designed to produce maximum effect with minimal risk. It is not a torrent of emotion, it is a scalpel, cutting away leverage and dismantling manipulative structures. To confront effectively, you must understand the toxic person's motives, weaknesses, and dependencies. Attack where they are vulnerable, not where they are defensive. Make your action undeniable, but measured. The goal is not to escalate chaos, but to assert dominance in a manner that reconfigures the dynamics of interaction in your favor. The fifth pathway revolves around strategic alliances. Toxicity often operates within networks, groups that reinforce behavior, validate manipulation, or amplify influence. Machiavelli knew that power is not only personal but relational. You cannot navigate toxicity in isolation. You must identify allies who bolster your position and counterbalance the forces arrayed against you. These alliances need not be overt. Subtle positioning, mutual interest, and the careful exchange of intelligence create support structures that shield you from the corrosive influence of toxic actors. The strategist understands that the terrain of human interaction is rarely neutral. Cultivating allies strengthens your capacity to act and constrains the manipulator's freedom. The sixth pathway is the disciplined redirection of energy. Toxic individuals feed on emotional and cognitive resources. Every reaction, every engagement, every thought invested in their behavior is energy they extract from you. To neutralize this, you must develop the capacity to redirect focus, to transform provocation into reflection, manipulation into insight, and challenge into preparation. This is not suppression, it is mastery. By converting their influence into strategic advantage, you reclaim agency. Each encounter becomes an opportunity to refine skill, expand understanding, and reinforce psychological resilience. The seventh and final pathway in this stage of mastery is the cultivation of resilience. Toxicity is persistent, adaptive, and relentless. Observing, boundary setting, perception management, selective confrontation, strategic alliances, and energy redirection all are futile without an internal fortress capable of withstanding continuous pressure. Resilience is forged in solitude, reflection, and the rigorous examination of one's vulnerabilities. Machiavelli emphasized the importance of preparedness, of fortifying one's position against uncertainty. In the context of toxic relationships, resilience ensures that external turbulence does not compromise internal stability. It transforms vulnerability into strength and reaction into strategy. In the dark theater of human interaction, these seven pathways converge to form a framework of dominance, control, and psychological sovereignty. Toxic people operate under the assumption that they will provoke, confuse, and manipulate with impunity. By mastering observation, detachment, boundary enforcement, selective engagement, perception influence, strategic confrontation, alliance building, energy redirection, and resilience, you dismantle the mechanisms of their influence. You become not merely untouchable but proactive, shaping the dynamics of every encounter to your advantage. And yet, mastery is iterative. Toxicity evolves, as does your environment, and so must your strategy. Machiavelli did not provide static instructions. He offered principles, adaptable frameworks for those willing to think critically, act decisively, and accept the unflinching truths of human behavior. You must embrace discomfort, challenge assumptions, and refine technique. Each toxic encounter is a battlefield, each manipulation a test, each provocation an opportunity to reinforce control. The path is neither easy nor comfortable, but the reward is profound: psychological freedom, strategic superiority, and the capacity to navigate human complexity without compromise. This stage of understanding leads to the next, the refinement of tactical implementation. Theory, without disciplined practice, is impotent. Observation and detachment prepare the mind, boundaries and perception establish control, confrontation, alliances, energy management, and resilience solidify it. The next step is learning to deploy these strategies dynamically, adapting to evolving threats and converting the abstract into actionable mastery. Machiavelli teaches that power is both art and science, requiring flexibility, intelligence, and ruthlessness. The toxic individual operates within predictable frameworks. Your task is to become the unpredictable force, the strategist who turns their own patterns against them. The journey through these seven pathways is not a casual exercise in self-help. It is a deliberate, tactical immersion into the mechanics of influence and human behavior. Each step demands attention, discipline, and courage. By internalizing these principles, you cultivate a mind that is both reflective and proactive, capable of navigating treachery with precision and transforming potential weakness into strategic advantage. The Machiavellian mind does not seek validation or approval. It seeks control, clarity, and mastery over circumstance. In the face of toxicity, these pathways are the tools that create invulnerability, the architecture of psychological sovereignty that no manipulator can breach. The mastery of the seven pathways, however, is merely the foundation. The true art lies in the subtle orchestration of these strategies within the ever-shifting theater of human interaction. Toxic individuals do not exist in isolation. They are embedded in systems, networks, and environments that amplify their influence. To navigate these spaces, one must adopt the mindset of the strategist, perceiving every interaction as a maneuver on the board of human behavior, every conversation as an opportunity to assert authority or reclaim ground. The world is not designed to be kind to the observant, but for those who wield insight with precision, it bends to accommodate their control. Consider the subtleties of social manipulation in group settings, where toxic people often wield disproportionate influence. They exploit hierarchy, reputation, and the inertia of group dynamics to create tension and dependency. Here, the Machiavellian principle of preemptive strategy is vital. One must anticipate not only individual manipulation, but the cascading effects across the network. A casual insult in a meeting may seem inconsequential, yet it can seed doubt, resentment, or division if left unchecked. By observing patterns, understanding alliances, and discerning motivations, you position yourself not as a passive target, but as a controlling force who subtly reorients the balance of influence. This requires patience, precision, and the willingness to act in ways that are invisible yet irrevocable. The deployment of perception management is particularly critical in these environments. Toxic individuals rely on misdirection, crafting appearances that mask their true intentions. They create illusions of cooperation, sympathy, and benevolence, yet every gesture is calculated to extract advantage. To counter this, one must cultivate a presence that is both formidable and inscrutable. Authority need not be loud, it can be silent, expressed through consistent behavior, careful language, and unshakable composure. By controlling what others perceive, you reduce the opportunities for exploitation and subtly shift the narrative to your advantage. The toxic individual, skilled in deception, finds themselves confronted with a mind that is not reactive, but anticipatory, a presence that destabilizes their strategy through mere observation and measured interaction. Detachment, though often misconstrued as coldness, is in fact an active engagement with reality in its most unadorned form. Emotional detachment does not mean absence of care, it is the elimination of vulnerability to manipulation. By refusing to invest your emotional currency where it can be spent against you, you preserve strength. Toxic individuals feed on reactivity. They seek to elicit overreactions, guilt, anger, or confusion. A detached mind is impervious to these provocations. Your responses, when they occur, are deliberate, calculated, and devoid of impulsive energy that can be exploited. In this sense, detachment becomes both shield and weapon, protecting you while subtly disarming your adversary. Strategic confrontation, when necessary, must be executed with exactitude. Unlike impulsive retaliation, which plays into the manipulator's hands, confrontation is most effective when it is premeditated and leverages psychological leverage. Identify the weaknesses that underpin their influence, a desire for control, fear of exposure, or dependency on external validation. Address these indirectly through precise, controlled action. Confrontation need not be dramatic. It can be an understated assertion of limits, a demonstration of competence, or the quiet imposition of boundaries that expose their manipulation as ineffective. The toxic individual, accustomed to reflexive responses, is destabilized when met with intentionality, a force that cannot be predicted or coerced. Energy management becomes an indispensable tool in this domain. Toxic individuals attempt to siphon mental, emotional, and social resources, leaving you depleted and reactive. By consciously redirecting attention, conserving effort, and converting engagement into insight, you reclaim control over your own internal economy. Each provocation is transformed into a data point, each subtle manipulation a lesson in human behavior. You learn not merely to survive, but to thrive, using the behavior of toxic individuals to refine your own strategy, expand your influence, and fortify psychological resilience. Machiavelli recognized that power is often gained by those who can endure discomfort, navigate adversity, and exploit the errors of their adversaries without succumbing to impulsivity or moral sentiment. Alliances, when cultivated with discretion, amplify your capacity for dominance. Toxic individuals often operate within social structures that reinforce their behavior. By forming relationships with those who share aligned interests, demonstrate reliability, or possess complementary influence, you construct a network that constrains manipulation. These alliances are not overt declarations of loyalty, but subtle shifts in alignment, exchanges of information, and mutual reinforcement of authority. In this way, you transform the environment from a theater of passive threat into a landscape of managed interactions where you are a principal actor, not a reactive victim. Strategic alignment is less about friendship and more about leverage, visibility, and shared reinforcement of boundaries that the toxic individual cannot easily disrupt. The orchestration of these strategies is not a mechanical exercise. It is an art that requires acute self-awareness, adaptive thinking, and the ability to anticipate consequences multiple steps ahead. Toxic individuals test resilience continuously, probing weaknesses and exploiting inconsistencies. To respond effectively, you must maintain clarity of purpose, the discipline to apply rules consistently, and the foresight to predict manipulations before they manifest. This is psychological chess played in real time. Each decision, each word, each gesture becomes part of a larger calculus of influence, where success is defined not by the defeat of others, but by the preservation and expansion of your own strategic autonomy. Consider the dynamic of emotional manipulation in intimate relationships. Toxic individuals often exploit attachment, trust, and the human propensity for empathy. They engineer scenarios that induce guilt, fear, or over-responsibility. Here, detachment, boundaries, and perception management converge. By maintaining emotional equilibrium, enforcing limits, and controlling the narrative of your interactions, you deprive the manipulator of leverage. Confrontation, when applied, is precise and surgical. It exposes behavioral patterns without descending into emotional conflict. Alliances in this context may be subtle, trusted confidants who provide perspective and reinforcement. Energy management ensures that each interaction strengthens rather than depletes your psychological resources. In these moments, the Machiavellian mind becomes an immovable presence, simultaneously aware, prepared, and strategically unassailable. The mastery of resilience is paramount because toxic individuals rarely relent. They adapt, they escalate, and they exploit any lapse in vigilance. Resilience is not passive endurance. It is the cultivation of an internal framework capable of absorbing pressure, anticipating shifts, and responding with precision. Meditation, reflection, and systematic evaluation of interactions create the structural integrity of this resilience. The mind becomes a fortress, where uncertainty, provocation, and manipulation cannot breach the walls. Machiavelli recognized that power is inseparable from preparation. The ruler who anticipates revolt, plots, and betrayal secures dominance, not through strength alone, but through foresight. In personal interactions, the principle is identical. Your psychological sovereignty is reinforced by the capacity to endure, observe, and act decisively in the face of continuous challenges. Toxicity is a relentless force, yet it is also inherently predictable. It is predicated upon patterns, exploitation of emotional vulnerability, manipulation of perception, and orchestration of social dynamics to extract advantage. The Machiavellian approach does not seek to moralize, suppress, or confront impulsively. It seeks to understand these patterns, anticipate moves, and act with precision. Each interaction becomes a rehearsal, each provocation an opportunity to refine technique, each subtle attack a demonstration of disciplined response. By internalizing these lessons, the strategist converts vulnerability into power, threat into opportunity, and chaos into controlled engagement. At this stage, the practitioner moves beyond mere defense and enters the realm of controlled influence. The toxic individual, accustomed to eliciting compliance, discovers that their methods are no longer effective. Observation has revealed patterns. Detachment neutralizes provocation. Boundaries and perception management assert control. Selective confrontation demonstrates dominance. Alliances provide reinforcement. Energy redirection conserves power. Resilience ensures continuity. The mind that integrates these practices operates not reactively, but proactively, shaping interactions on its own terms. The toxic presence is no longer an overwhelming force, but a variable within a system controlled by your strategic awareness. This is the essence of advanced Machiavellian application, to transform exposure to manipulation into an exercise of power, insight, and autonomy. The The practitioner does not seek vengeance or domination for its own sake, but achieves psychological sovereignty. Toxicity, though persistent, becomes predictable, manageable, and ultimately impotent. The strategist recognizes that human behavior is governed by desire, fear, and self-interest. By mastering these dynamics within the context of toxic interactions, one achieves not only personal liberation but a profound understanding of human nature in its rawest form. And yet, mastery is never complete. Toxic individuals evolve, environments shift, and patterns of influence mutate. The next stage involves the integration of tactical foresight with adaptive strategy, the ability to apply these principles fluidly across diverse contexts, and the capacity to transform confrontation into leverage. Machiavelli understood that power is dynamic, requiring constant vigilance, flexibility, and psychological acuity. The path ahead is one of continuous refinement, where observation, detachment, boundaries, perception, confrontation, alliances, energy management, and resilience converge into a living system of mastery. The journey through these stages prepares the mind to engage the world with a clarity and authority that few achieve. Toxic individuals, once sources of fear or frustration, become instruments of insight. Provocation becomes a tool to test resolve, manipulation an exercise in discernment, and adversity a forge for strategic refinement. The Machiavellian mind does not merely survive in the presence of toxicity. It thrives, adapts, and transforms every threat into an opportunity for self-sovereignty and unassailable control. There comes a moment in every battle with a toxic individual when the strategist must cross a threshold, stepping beyond the realm of observation and defensive mastery into a darker, more complex terrain where influence is not merely protected but exerted with deliberate precision. Up until now, you have learned to shield yourself, to anticipate their maneuvers, to dismantle their manipulative attempts before they reach your core. But mastery does not end with resistance. It expands into the subtle, calculated shaping of the very terrain on which the toxic individual attempts to operate. This is where Machiavellian strategy becomes art, where the shadows you once feared become the very substance you mold to assert your dominance. Every manipulator believes they are the one manipulating. Every toxic person believes they are in control of the narrative. And yet, beneath this confidence lies their greatest vulnerability, their predictability, their habits, their insecurities, their tactics, their cycles. They repeat them endlessly, unaware that their patterns form a blueprint for their undoing. The Machiavellian mind understands that true mastery is not achieved by overpowering a toxic person through force, but by using the very structure of their toxicity to redirect the flow of influence. To operate at this level, you must first understand the architecture of their dysfunction. Toxic individuals do not behave randomly. They depend on predictable psychological mechanisms: projection, triangulation, guilt induction, gaslighting, social manipulation, emotional withdrawal, intimidation, dependency creation. These are not spontaneous choices, but reflexive maneuvers designed to maintain control. Each time they repeat these maneuvers, they reveal their deepest weaknesses. And once you understand these weaknesses, you understand the map of their entire psyche. Projection, for example, betrays insecurity. When they accuse you of intentions you do not possess, they expose what they themselves fear or desire. Triangulation reveals a hunger for validation and a need to maintain chaos as a way of asserting control. Guilt induction betrays dependency. They need your reaction more than you need theirs. Gaslighting reveals fragility. Those who are truly powerful do not need to distort your perception. Emotional withdrawal exposes fear of vulnerability. Intimidation reveals fear disguised as strength. Dependency creation reveals that without the control they exert over you, they are irrelevant. Once you see these tactics not as attacks but as confessions, you gain an advantage the toxic individual cannot comprehend. Machiavelli understood that the first step in gaining power over others is to understand what they fear, what they desire, and what they hide. Toxic people broadcast all three every time they attempt to manipulate. And yet, knowing their weaknesses is only the beginning. The next stage of mastery involves learning to navigate the terrain with controlled influence. You do not simply react, you guide. You do not simply defend, you redirect. You do not simply block their maneuvers, you reshape the battlefield so their maneuvers become ineffective by design. Imagine the toxic person who thrives on emotional reaction. Their greatest weapon is your response. Without reaction, their influence collapses. But you do not merely deny them emotional access, you give them only the type of reaction that serves your intention. You allow them to believe they have provoked you while providing a response that subtly leads them where you want them to go. This is not deception for cruelty, it is strategic interaction. You are no longer a participant in their narrative, you are the author of the new one. The Machiavellian strategist learns that silence can be more powerful than confrontation, that calmness can be more unsettling than aggression, that strategic withdrawal can be more dominant than attack. Toxic individuals depend on predictable responses. They depend on your need for justice, your desire to explain yourself, your instinct to defend your integrity. But the strategist relinquishes the need to be understood and embraces the power of being unreadable. There is a profound psychological advantage in being an unknown quantity. Toxic individuals excel at exploiting predictable targets. But what happens when the target does not react as expected? What happens when the rules they depend upon no longer apply? Their confusion becomes your leverage. Their frustration becomes your shield. Their inability to predict your moves destabilizes their entire strategy. And so, the next phase of mastery is unpredictability. Controlled unpredictability is the psychological fog through which they cannot navigate. It is not chaos. It is calculated misdirection. When they expect confrontation, you offer calm neutrality. When they expect guilt, you offer indifference. When they expect compliance, you offer polite distance. When they expect emotional persuasion, you offer logic. When they attempt to intimidate, you respond with a level of quiet self-possession that leaves them unsettled. Unpredictability weakens the toxic individual's influence because their manipulative tactics require stability. They must know your weak spots, your predictable responses, your emotional triggers. When these vanish, so does their control. Now they are the ones reacting. They are the ones questioning. They are the ones retreating into confusion. This phase of strategy is not about cruelty, it is about reclaiming your psychological territory. It is about asserting that you will not be moved by chaos, provocation, or emotional distortion. It is about demonstrating, without words, that your mind is inaccessible to manipulation. Yet, unpredictability alone is not enough. The deeper level of Machiavellian strategy involves something far more subtle, influence without overt action. This is the art of steering outcomes without appearing to steer them. You become the silent architect of interactions. You plant ideas indirectly. You guide perceptions without confrontation. You reinforce boundaries without aggression. You shape the environment in ways that limit the toxic individual's options without ever explicitly opposing them. Consider the toxic coworker who thrives on gossip and triangulation. Instead of confronting them, you quietly strengthen your relationships with key individuals. You speak clearly, calmly, and directly. You maintain impeccable consistency. You offer nothing that can be twisted or misrepresented. You subtly highlight facts in conversations that expose inconsistencies in their narratives. You allow their behavior to reveal itself without your intervention. Over time, their influence wanes, not because you attack them, but because you crafted an environment where their tactics lose effectiveness. Or, consider the toxic partner who uses emotional instability as a means of control. Instead of reacting to every mood shift, you anchor yourself with unwavering composure. You set boundaries that are communicated once and reinforced through action rather than argument. You refuse to participate in cycles of chaos. You do not reward manipulation with attention. You do not reward aggression with submission. You do not reward guilt induction with explanation. In time, they either adapt to your stability or their tactics collapse under their own weight. This is the essence of Machiavellian influence. Control without force, dominance without aggression, victory without battle. But influence requires another ingredient, the ability to see the world through the toxic person's eyes without accepting their worldview. You must understand their motives intimately, their insecurities deeply, their fears instinctively. Not to empathize, but to anticipate. Not to excuse, but to predict. Machiavelli taught that to rule effectively, one must understand human nature in its rawest form, including the parts that society condemns. Toxic individuals are not enigmas. They are case studies in unfiltered ego, fear, and insecurity. If you can understand them, you can control the dynamic. But this understanding must be paired with the discipline to remain above their level. You do not descend into their chaos. You do not mimic their manipulation. You do not sacrifice your integrity to match their tactics. Machiavellian strategy is not immoral, it is amoral. It does not seek cruelty, it seeks clarity. It does not seek to dominate for pleasure, it seeks to navigate reality without illusion. And so, as you refine your mastery, you arrive at the next stage, the realization that not every toxic person must be confronted. Not every battle must be fought. Some toxic individuals are best neutralized by quiet distance. Others are best dismantled through their own self-destructive tendencies. Others are best managed through strategic diplomacy. The Machiavellian mind knows when to act, when to wait, and when to withdraw, not out of fear, but out of strategic intelligence. Some individuals cannot be reformed. Some cannot be reasoned with. Some cannot be elevated, and some cannot be allowed to remain. But the strategist decides not with emotion, but with precision. The strategist recognizes the difference between a threat that must be dismantled and a threat that will dismantle itself. And when the time comes to make that decision, the strategist does so without hesitation, because clarity replaces emotional conflict. At this stage, you begin to see the truth. Toxic individuals only possess the power you give them. Their influence exists in the space where your boundaries waver, where your reactions feed them, where your fears silence you, where your doubts weaken your stance. But once these spaces are closed, once clarity replaces confusion, once composure replaces reaction, once unpredictability replaces vulnerability, the toxic individual is left exposed, not as a powerful manipulator, but as a fragile, predictable pattern. And this realization marks the threshold you are now crossing. You are no longer learning how to defend yourself from toxic people. You are now learning how to control the psychological landscape in which they attempt to operate. You are learning how to guide outcomes in ways that protect your sovereignty. You are learning how to reshape relationships through strategic influence. You are learning how to see through manipulation with clarity, so sharp it becomes a weapon. You are learning how to become the presence that cannot be manipulated, the mind that cannot be infiltrated, the individual who cannot be controlled. And as you step deeper into this mastery, the world begins to change around you. People sense something in you, an authority that is not loud, not aggressive, not domineering, but unmistakable. Toxic individuals sense it too. They feel the shift. They see that their old methods no longer work. They cannot predict you. They cannot provoke you. They cannot influence you. Their tactics fall flat. Their attempts backfire. Their leverage evaporates. Because now you are operating from a place of Machiavellian clarity, quietly powerful, strategically aware, psychologically sovereign. And with this, you step into the next evolution, where strategy becomes instinct, where awareness becomes second nature, where influence becomes effortless. By the time you reach this stage, you are no longer reacting to toxicity, you are shaping it, bending the circumstances and the people around you to the silent architecture of your strategy. Toxic individuals, in all their subtlety and aggression, rely upon inconsistency, unpredictability, and reflexive responses from those they target. You, however, have cultivated a mind that is both patient and anticipatory, disciplined yet flexible. Your mastery does not come from brute force, nor from moral superiority, but from the quiet, relentless assertion of control over yourself, and by extension, the environment in which toxicity attempts to operate. The battlefield has shifted. You now decide which encounters will escalate, which will dissipate, and which will be redirected entirely. Strategic engagement is the next frontier. Here, every interaction is an opportunity to reinforce boundaries and subtly reassert dominance. Toxic individuals thrive on chaos, confusion, and emotional turbulence. They manipulate reality not only through their words and actions, but by shaping the perception of those around them. To counteract this, you must employ layered strategies that combine observation, restraint, and the selective application of influence. You engage without yielding, you respond without reaction, and you assert authority without aggression. The toxic individual, accustomed to easy victories and predictable reactions, is confronted with a force they cannot penetrate, your mind fortified and unwavering. Control of the narrative is paramount. Toxic people rely on constructing stories in which they are always central, always righteous, and always justified. They twist words, reinterpret actions, and exploit ambiguity to maintain influence. The Machiavellian mind intercepts this narrative by shaping perceptions quietly yet decisively. You do not need to argue, you need to present clarity. You do not need to win approval, you need to establish undeniable consistency. Every action you take, every boundary you enforce, every subtle gesture of composure communicates authority without conflict. In these moments, the toxic individual's manipulation collapses, not because you fought against it, but because you operate outside its influence entirely. This is the essence of psychological sovereignty, a state where manipulation loses its power because it no longer aligns with the reality you create. You maintain independence from their agenda, and yet, through observation and subtle influence, you can guide outcomes to ensure your objectives remain intact. Toxic individuals often misread calm, detached authority as weakness or passivity. This is their critical error. Patience becomes a weapon, consistency a shield, and strategic unpredictability a lever that destabilizes their confidence. By mastering these forces, you control the flow of interaction without ever appearing controlling. At this stage, selective confrontation remains a critical tool, but now it is refined, surgical, and almost invisible. Confrontation is no longer a reactive defense, it is an instrument of precision that neutralizes influence at its source. You confront not with anger, not with judgment, not with moral indignation, but with unflinching clarity that exposes patterns and asserts boundaries. The toxic individual, who relies on blurred lines and emotional ambiguity, is faced with a structure they cannot compromise. They are forced to reveal themselves fully, and in doing so, they become predictable, manageable, and strategically addressable. The act of confrontation, when executed at this level, is both disarming and transformative. Energy management has now become instinctual. You no longer expend mental or emotional resources on unnecessary reaction. Instead, you channel your focus, attention, and psychological energy toward analysis, planning, and influence. Every provocation becomes a data point, every manipulative act an opportunity to refine strategy. You internalize the principle that the toxic person's power exists only in the space they occupy in your mind. By refusing to grant them access to this space, you reclaim sovereignty, conserve resources, and maintain a level of control that is impervious to emotional coercion. Alliances and relational networks take on greater significance at this stage. You understand that influence is amplified by strategic connections. Toxic individuals often operate by isolating targets, creating dependency, and exploiting gaps in social cohesion. By cultivating relationships grounded in mutual respect, reliability, and aligned objectives, you create a buffer that limits the toxic individual's reach. These alliances need not be ostentatious. They are subtle, consistent, and enforce boundaries collectively. When toxic actors encounter an environment fortified by relational awareness, their ability to manipulate diminishes exponentially. You become the axis around which social dynamics pivot. The cultivation of unpredictability reaches its apex here. By remaining strategically fluid, you prevent the toxic individual from anticipating your moves. Controlled unpredictability undermines their reliance on reflexive manipulation. When they attempt to provoke, you respond in ways they do not expect, creating uncertainty and destabilizing their influence. This unpredictability is not reckless, it is deliberate, measured, and aligned with your broader strategy. By maintaining a psychological edge, you ensure that no tactic they deploy has predictable efficacy. They become the ones responding, questioning, and adapting, an inversion of power that fundamentally shifts the dynamic. At the same time, resilience evolves from a defensive principle into an offensive one. Previously, resilience ensured that toxic influence could not breach your mind. Now, resilience supports sustained strategic action, enabling you to engage continuously without fatigue, error, or emotional compromise. Machiavelli observed that the ruler who can endure, anticipate, and respond with calm authority exerts control far greater than the one who relies solely on strength or intimidation. In personal interactions, this translates to a psychological fortitude that allows you to remain unshaken while subtly guiding outcomes, turning continuous exposure to toxicity into a proving ground for mastery. Redirection of energy becomes a subtle art form. Toxic individuals attempt to consume your focus, attention, and emotional resources. You do not merely resist. You transform these encounters into opportunities. Frustration is converted into insight. Provocation is converted into anticipation. conflict is converted into leverage. By redirecting energy in this manner, every interaction strengthens your psychological position, increases clarity, and reduces vulnerability. You transform the threat into a mechanism of empowerment. In this stage, you also refine the integration of perception management and subtle influence. Toxic individuals rely heavily on how others perceive you, your reactions, demeanor, and alignment. By controlling perception, you ensure that your authority and composure are recognized even unconsciously by those around you. Subtle reinforcement, consistent behavior, and intentional presence create an aura that limits the toxic individual's ability to manipulate the social environment. They are left isolated, their patterns ineffective, their influence diminished. And yet, even as mastery solidifies, you remain vigilant. Toxicity adapts, environments shift, threats evolve. The Machiavellian strategist knows that no victory is permanent, unless continuously maintained through awareness, discipline, and action. Mastery is iterative. Observation must continue, boundaries must be reinforced, energy must be preserved, alliances must be maintained, influence must be exerted with precision. The toxic individual, no matter how skilled, cannot succeed against a mind that operates with unyielding clarity and relentless adaptability. Now, as you approach the culmination of strategy, you recognize that the essence of dealing with toxic people is not vengeance, not confrontation for its own sake, and not moral judgment. It is sovereignty, the unwavering control over your psychological space, your actions, and your influence. You no longer allow chaos to dictate your behavior. You no longer grant manipulation a foothold in your life. You no longer react reflexively to provocation. Every move is deliberate, every response calculated, every engagement a reflection of mastery. And in this mastery lies freedom. Freedom from the need to explain, to justify, to appease, to react. Freedom from the emotional toll of manipulation. Freedom to engage on your terms, shape outcomes with strategic intent, and preserve psychological sovereignty, no matter the level of toxicity encountered. You become not just untouchable but formidable, a presence that shifts the landscape of every interaction without effort, a mind that operates with clarity and precision, a strategist whose authority is recognized without debate. With these tools, the toxic individual is no longer a threat, but a predictable variable, a challenge whose patterns you can navigate, redirect, and neutralize. You achieve a state of unassailable psychological control, not through force, but through disciplined observation, strategic influence, emotional sovereignty, and relentless adaptability. The battlefield is no longer external, it exists within your own mind, where clarity, foresight, and composure dictate every outcome. And it is here, on the precipice of full mastery, that you prepare to transition into the final stage, where strategy is no longer merely defensive or reactive, but transformative, a state in which engagement with toxicity becomes an exercise in absolute control, self-sovereignty, and the embodiment of Machiavellian wisdom in its most refined and potent form. The final stage of mastery is not merely survival, not merely control. It is transformation. By now you have learned to observe without bias, detach without indifference, set boundaries without apology, engage without reflex, influence without aggression, redirect energy without effort, and cultivate resilience without compromise. You have learned to see the architecture of manipulation, anticipate every move, and act with surgical precision. But now, the pinnacle of Machiavellian strategy calls for something deeper, the embodiment of sovereignty so absolute that toxicity ceases to exist as an external force. It becomes an element you can navigate, neutralize, or even convert into advantage with unerring clarity. At this stage, every interaction is a demonstration of power realized through restraint. Toxic individuals who once relied on your emotional reactivity, your uncertainty, your impulsive judgment, now encounter a presence that cannot be swayed or startled. They test your limits, but you have no limits they can exploit. They attempt to provoke, but their provocations fall like stones against an immovable wall. They attempt deception, yet every lie or distortion is transparent to your discerning mind. Every tactic they employ is countered not with force, but with unassailable awareness. You have become the calm eye at the center of their storm. But this mastery carries a responsibility, the responsibility to act with purpose. Freedom without direction is stagnation. Power without intent is wasted energy. The toxic individual may remain a variable, an irritant, or a manipulative presence, But the world you occupy is no longer defined by them. It is defined by your choices, your influence, your discipline, your vision. The strategist recognizes that engagement with toxicity is a test of character, clarity, and courage. Every interaction is an opportunity to reinforce your sovereignty, to refine your instincts, and to demonstrate the depth of your psychological mastery. Here, unpredictability reaches its most potent form. You operate on principles invisible to those who rely on manipulation. The toxic individual, who once calculated every move, now encounters a mind that cannot be predicted. Your actions are deliberate yet fluid, your responses calculated yet adaptive, your presence commanding without the need for demonstration. You have internalized the rhythm of influence. You no longer react because the storm is around you. You react because you have designed the storm's boundaries. The toxic are left disoriented, unable to penetrate, unable to control, forced to navigate a terrain that you have meticulously prepared. At the same time, your alliances and relational networks extend your sovereignty into the environment itself. Toxic individuals may attempt to manipulate indirectly, through gossip, triangulation, or influence over others, but you have fortified your position. Relationships are structured to reinforce clarity, consistency, and alignment with your objectives. Allies, confidants, and observers function not merely as support, but as extensions of your strategic presence. Every networked interaction strengthens your authority and limits the toxic individual's capacity to create disruption. Machiavellian strategy is amplified not only by internal mastery, but by the architecture of relationships you carefully maintain. Energy management becomes instinctive. You no longer expend mental or emotional currency on provocation, manipulation, or chaos. Encounters that once drained you now reinforce your insight. Challenges that once demanded reaction now become opportunities for observation, for strategy, for subtle influence. Every provocation, every subtle attack, every manipulative maneuver becomes a tool in your arsenal, an instrument to refine awareness and an opportunity to extend control. The toxic individual's power over you, once substantial, is rendered inert. The essence of this stage is complete integration, observation, detachment, boundaries, perception management, selective confrontation, alliances, energy redirection, resilience, and unpredictability converge into a single, fluid practice. Your mind operates as a unified system of control, free from the influence of manipulation. The toxic individual, no matter how skillful, is rendered predictable, manageable, and ultimately impotent. You have internalized Machiavelli's core lesson: power is mastery over oneself first, and over circumstance second. True influence emerges not from coercion or aggression, but from the unyielding discipline of thought, presence, and action. Now, as you approach the culmination of this journey, you must recognize the ultimate truth. The toxic individual exists as a reflection of vulnerability, yours, theirs, and society's. They seek to exploit weakness, uncertainty, and lack of clarity. But the mind that is trained, disciplined, and sovereign reflects nothing that can be exploited. Their toxicity is nullified not by confrontation alone, but by a complete embodiment of strategic mastery, psychological independence, and unwavering self-possession. You are no longer at risk of manipulation. You are a force that reshapes the very space they occupy. And this is where the final transformative power emerges: choice. The Machiavellian mind knows that mastery over toxicity is not about submission, avoidance, or moral judgment. It is about deliberate, empowered choice. You may choose engagement, but only on your terms. You may choose distance, but only to preserve clarity. You may choose to dismantle, redirect, or neutralize manipulation, but only with precise intention. Every choice reinforces sovereignty. Every decision becomes a declaration that your mind, your energy, your space, and your life are not subject to the whims of the toxic. You decide the battlefield, the terms, and the outcome. And so, the call to action resounds: step into this mastery fully, observe without bias, detach without indifference, set boundaries without apology, engage with precision, influence subtly, redirect energy strategically, cultivate resilience, and embrace unpredictability. Do not flinch when provocation appears. Do not waver when manipulation arises. Stand as the architect of your own psychological landscape, the unshakable presence in the storm, the strategist who transforms every toxic encounter into an instrument of empowerment. Claim your sovereignty, command your environment, shape outcomes with clarity. Let no manipulator, deceiver, or provocateur dictate your thoughts, emotions, or actions. You are the master of the battlefield within your mind, the observer who becomes the author, the strategist who becomes the force no toxicity can penetrate. Every interaction is now a testament to your discipline. Every challenge is now an opportunity for dominance. Every toxic presence is now a variable within the realm you control. Rise fully into this power. Step beyond reaction, beyond fear, beyond compromise. Become the immovable force, the calculated presence, the mind unassailable. Let every toxic individual you encounter confront not your vulnerability, but your sovereignty. Let them discover that you are not merely resistant, but invincible. Let them see that their manipulation has no purchase, their provocation no leverage, their deception no effect. And in this realization, claim the ultimate reward: freedom, control, clarity, and the profound mastery of human interaction. The toxic world will continue to test, challenge, and provoke. But you, armed with the Machiavellian understanding of observation, strategy, resilience, and influence, will stand untouchable. This is not a promise of ease, it is a declaration of power. A life lived under manipulation is surrendered, a life lived with strategy is sovereign. Choose sovereignty, choose clarity, choose mastery, choose the life that toxic individuals cannot dictate. Step into your unassailable power and let the world bend to the force of your disciplined mind.